The Self is an Illusion and How It Made Me Lose My Mind. Hi, I'm Britt Hartley. I'm an atheist spiritual director at No Nonsense Spirituality. I have a master's degree in theology and I focus on tools for existential crisis, nihilism, and the void. One aspect of deconstruction is realizing that the self is an illusion. So, in order to be as complex as we are, we need our brains to be able to be doing a lot of things in the background of our attention. An easy one that everyone can agree with is your brain is doing a lot of autonomic functions like breathing or controlling your heart rate, controlling your temperature without you being aware of it. The brain can also do things like walk or drive without your conscious attention, but learning how to walk and learning how to drive once took your attention. And now your subconscious brain is like, I got this, and that frees up your attention to think about other things when you're driving or when you're walking. So we're learning in science, although wisdom traditions that have had meditation have known this for much longer, we're learning just how much the brain is doing in the dark of our attention. Our brain is processing 11 million bits of data per second, and we can only attend to about 40 bits of information per second. So that is a huge difference. And that's just in 1 second. Imagine how much that is in a lifetime. So most of what we are is in the dark. The brain is prioritizing information on its own. If you hear a loud sound next to you without even thinking about it, your brain prioritizes that new information and you turn your head. Not only that, but your brain is weighing things like conflicting values or pros and cons or searching for information all without you being aware of it. There's a part of your brain that, for example, is looking for the word that you want to say. And then when it has it, even if it's days later, because your brain's been working on this in the background, it'll throw that word into your conscious mind and you'll say, aha, that was the word that I was looking for. So what our brains had to do, because of how complex we are, is to create a shortcut, an avatar. And we're this complex mosaic of conscious experience and all this information coming in at once. So the brain created this leader, this illusion where this leader feels like a me, feels like a unified self, feels like you're kind of sitting behind your eyes directing your attention, feels like you're totally rational and making conscious free will decisions, but it's an illusion. It's like the person at the Oscars who is reading who won the Oscar. Like they're the ones on the camera doing the announcing, making the decision, but they didn't make the decision. The decision was made by a board with complex voting and debates and hierarchies of values. And they discuss that, and then they give the piece of paper to the person on stage to announce who won the Oscar. That's essentially what our decisions are. And we know this not just from meditation. I mean, you can watch your thoughts and see how you're not the author of your own thoughts, but also from neuroscience. We can see that when a decision is made in your brain, and like the decision is made in your brain in the background, and then the conscious mind will say, I'm choosing X over Y. But there's this split second where the decision has been made, but the you part of your brain doesn't know it yet. Now, some people will say, okay, like, yes, there are some things that my brain is doing that are automatic, but I'm so self-aware that I can actually be aware of my subconscious motivations and make conscious decisions. So I still have free will and I still have a self because I can watch all this and I can make conscious decisions. And we will talk about free will in another episode because I want to do that justice, but it still doesn't get you to free will, and it still doesn't get you to a unified self, because even when we're more aware of things that are subconscious, like our hierarchy of values, we still don't choose our core values. So for example, we're all operating under a hierarchy of values, and we still didn't choose to become the kind of person who would choose X over Y. We can become more self-aware and notice, oh, these are my 3 or 4 core values. And we can start to notice more and more about what's going on behind the scenes, but that never gets us to free will. It never gets us to a unified self, because we simply cannot attend to all of that information at once. You have an entire universe with a history as old as life itself in your own brain, and you will never totally understand what's going on with it. It's a frontier. It's a frontier that we can explore, but we never get to the end of in a lifetime. So the illusion of the self just as a helpful shortcut, as an avatar that your brain creates in order to have it feel like you're making decisions, to have some kind of leader for all of this subconscious experience that we just cannot attend to all at once, can plunge people into the void when it dissipates. So I'm going to share my personal example here. Before I did any psychedelics, I was playing in this space through meditation, particularly a very famous meditation called the Headless Way. And in this guided meditation, it's done famously now by Richard Lang, but it's much older than him as a meditation. You essentially start to notice the world from the perspective that doesn't include a physical head. So you start looking for the illusion of the self in the head until it totally breaks down. You start to actually look for that sensation of where is the self, essentially. And it's like if you ask the actor presenting the Oscar how the decision was made, and the actor eventually realizing that he or she was given the piece of paper and it didn't come from him or her. And you essentially play with your perception. It's a fairly long meditation. I think mine was about 2 hours when I did the full one. And you essentially play with your perception until the illusion of the self and all the identity wrapped around it fades. And all that is left is just pure perception without identifying it, without identifying it as you. It's just pure perception. So I did this at a time in my life when I was losing other anchors. I had lost God and religion. I think I had also lost free will by then. I had lost my family. I had lost my faith. I had lost my sense of belonging. So losing the self was completely disorienting for me. And it threw me into a dissociative episode. And I do have tendencies towards dissociative depression. So that's not an abnormal place for my brain to go. So for about 4 days afterward, when I saw a hand in my field of vision, I didn't say, here's my hand. I would say, oh, it's a hand. Like there was no identifying that this was my hand, because the self wasn't operating anymore, because it had totally dissolved and my psyche was just kind of trying to deal with it. It was just the awareness that there's a hand. And it was scary because I didn't know what was happening to me. It felt like I had lost my mind. It felt like I was a robot. It was incredibly difficult to function. I didn't have language yet about things like ego dissolution or ego death. I was completely alone in my journey in nihilism. And I didn't have any tools to reorient myself when the self, which is one of my last anchors, dissolved, and I was just left floating in awareness without a self to direct things, and without any beliefs, and without any God, and without any person to help. And so I was just kind of floating in awareness in a way that made me feel like I was losing my mind. So the problem was, here's another anchor lost. No one can understand me. I probably need to go check into a psych ward because I'm trying to like robot my way through the day. And now I'm even deeper into in the void. Now you can do this fairly easily also on psychedelics, which I didn't do until later. But anywhere that you can go in the mind on drugs, you can also do with your sober mind, especially in deep meditation. So on mushrooms, for example, your default mode network of your brain shuts off and people experience what it's like to just be being in perception. And you can feel, it's a very common experience to feel like, oh, there's a body here, but I don't know if it's my body. That's very common experience in psychedelics. But by the time I had tried psychedelics, none of that was a new experience for me. I didn't use psychedelics at all as part of my deconstruction. Philosophy and just thinking about these things was enough to take me to many of these places. So the self is an illusion from various fields, from psychedelics and what happens when we turn down that part of the brain, neuroscience studies that shows how decisions are made in the background of your attention, mindfulness and meditation where you can dissolve this illusion by noticing that you don't control your thoughts. You have no idea what your next thought is going to be. Cognitive psychology, which shows that our self-conception changes and shifts. It isn't permanent. And then we can study dissociative experiences like the headless meditation. There's philosophical arguments. David Hume, for example, argued that when we have some introspection, we don't find this single permanent self, but this series of thoughts and experiences that come and go. So Hume famously said that when he looks within, he finds only a bundle of perceptions. And then we have sociology supporting this by showing that Your sense of self is not innate because it is so highly based on your environment, and you essentially build the sense of self that can interact best in the world and can survive your family dynamic. We learn this when you dive into family dynamics and you learn why you constructed the self that you did as a child. So if you're with me so far that the self is an illusion, there's an aspect of the mind that can direct attention and feel in control and feel an identity and feel like I'm the author of my thoughts and feelings and I make decisions. And when we realize that that's a shortcut, what do we do with that? Is that good or bad? How do we function knowing that we're simply a bundle of perceptions that creates an avatar as a shortcut for making decisions in the world and operating in the world? This is where it gets good. When the illusion of what you are dissipates, it opens the door to a much wider field and a more accurate view of what you are. So the three main benefits that comes from dissolving the illusion. First and foremost, it leads to a greater sense of freedom. When we recognize that the self is not a fixed identity, but a fluid construct, we can let go of a lot of the burdens and limitations that we impose on ourselves because we're trying to always fix our identity and have it look good to other people is part of that. So this realization allows us to respond to life more flexibly without being trapped by our fears and our desires and our anxieties. Without a fixed identity, you can move and shift in ways that more accurately reflect the complex tapestry of what you are, instead of getting stuck that this is what I am, so this is what I have to keep doing, and this is, you just can get stuck in whatever self that you've had to create. Number two, dissolving the illusion of the self fosters this deep sense of interconnectedness, which is so helpful when you're feeling alone. Because when we begin to see that our thoughts and experiences are not isolated, but they're part of this larger tapestry of existence, it can really cultivate compassion and empathy and connection to others as we recognize that their experiences are not so different from our own. So when we understand that the boundaries between self and other are at least partly an illusion, then I can pay attention to how much I'm connected to the world. When I'm paying attention, even on days where I feel like I'm alone in my experience, if I pay attention, I still make rice the way that my college roommate, I've even forgotten her name, taught me to. I say a phrase that I heard from a podcast years ago, and I don't even remember what podcast it's from. I eat the same foods when I'm stressed that my mother did because she did that growing up when she was stressed. I got my hair done recently because of an acquaintance who got a similar cut, and I thought it looked so cute on her. If you really focus on everything that you do and say and think, you realize that you're connected to the whole world, even to people who are dead, who still live on inside of you. And that can really dissipate this feeling of isolation, that you're alone in your experience, when really you are the room of everyone you've ever met and listened to and seen, even going back in time. And that can mean that we're all like that. And there's probably someone out there using a phrase that I said that they don't remember came from me, and it's just become part of them. Or they have said something to one of their children who's struggling in nihilism, and now it's part of them. And I'm connected to them in that way, even though we don't recognize it. So we are far more interconnected than we realize from the point of view of our identity, because from my identity, nobody else is just like me. Nobody else experiences my point of view from my identity. But when I dissolve my identity, I realize I am connected to everyone and everything. All right, number three, many people find that with the reduction of this kind of self-referential thinking, there's a decrease in stress and anxiety. There becomes this greater sense of peace and contentment, and just being able to be in the flow of the present moment of experience rather than clinging to this fixed identity. We can experience life more fully and joyfully. Otherwise, we spend a lot of time kind of curating our identity and obsessing about how it's being received by others. So when you realize that the self is an illusion, you can simply drop into the flow of just conscious experience a little bit easier with however the universe is showing up at each moment, rather than obsessing about what am I going to say that looks good? Does that person like me? That thing that I said was stupid. We can just eliminate a lot of that neurotic noise because we've kind of dropped this sense of self altogether. So the point here, though, is not to kill the self. We get this way too much from male spiritual gurus who grew up with this overinflated sense of self and then had a huge burst in their spiritual development by learning that the self is an illusion and that the world doesn't revolve around their own ego. And this can be really healthy, especially for the subset of men that are really overinflated with their self-importance. Z-Dog talks about this in an interview I did with him where he said he was that guy. He was the doctor who had a strong sense of self and a very healthy income, and I am smart and I'm important. So his spiritual journey really catapulted when the self was able to dissolve and he was able to find a place of balance. But the point is not to kill the self. It's a useful shortcut that, like any aspect of ourselves, has benefits and has a shadow side. The point is to be able to wear a self like clothing, where you can put it on and go out into the world and my name is Britt and here are my qualifications and blah, blah, blah. But at any time you can take it off or you can change your clothing based on the situation. Otherwise, the clothing that you wear that you've identified with, that this is me, I'm going to wear this all the time, becomes a trap. If you always have to wear this shirt with this brand name because this is our identity, that's a trap. Our clothing has benefits for functioning in a social society, but it becomes a trap if you identify with it too much and you can't take it off and you can't change it based on the situation. So we still function in the world with a sense of self that allows us to navigate life effectively. The proper balance lies in being aware of the self as a construct rather than becoming overly identified with it. So we can still appreciate the role of the self in social interactions and decision making. The reason it's a shortcut is because it's a helpful shortcut. And we can even use it for personal growth without mistaking it for our ultimate reality and ultimate identity. So rather than trying to kill the self, kill the ego, we should really be aiming to just disidentify from it so that it no longer becomes a source of suffering or delusion. We can embrace our identities while understanding that they're not the entirety of what we are. And this balance allows us to engage with the world meaningfully while also remaining open to these deeper truths of our interconnected existence and the fullness of our experience. So I've now met hundreds of women who have come out of religion and they step out, and the first thing they do when they step into the spiritual world, which is still very heavily male dominated, is that they'll go to their, some kind of male guru that they found, and they will try for years to kill their ego because there's all of this talk about it and they're just not getting the benefits. And the reason is because they don't have an overinflated sense of self. That would be like telling someone to take off all their clothes, but they're already naked and they're like, I'm not getting anything from this. So for some to get to that balance place where the illusion of the self is a tool, but you're not constrained by it. For some, that's going to be an ego death and ego dissolution. But for some, they need to build to that place because they never finished growing up. They don't have enough identity at all. This can happen especially for women who have been raised in patriarchal religion, or if you have a narcissistic parent, maybe you grew up queer in a place where you weren't allowed to be so. For whatever reason in your formative years, if you did not finish the task of building an identity, you actually have to build to that place, not dissolve to that place. So for some people, the most spiritual thing that you can do is build a healthy self, date yourself, order the kind of pizza that you want instead of deferring to what others want. Do you know how many women, especially mothers, have such an underinflated sense of their own self that if you ask them what they're like or what they want, their brain short circuits because they don't even remember anymore? The benefit here with the sense of self is to use it as a tool, and that when you realize this, that you are far more than this avatar shortcut, you can be free, you can grow, you can change, and you can observe the complexity of what you are and marvel at it and see how interconnected it is, and also be less neurotic as you obsess about your avatar less. Now, the reason that this is hard to do when you're in nihilism is because you're already losing psychological and social anchors left and right. Maybe you've gotten into postmodernism or you're into neuroscience or whatever you're doing that's kind of blowing up anchors that's leaving you in nihilism. And so this is just another anchor that you can lose that can leave you completely disoriented when the brain's only option is to check out dissociate and numb, because it's essentially like too much. It's too much. You don't have enough tools to orient. And that's why I get so many people in nihilism who are completely numbed out and dissociated. So what I hope this video can do, if this is you, is help you embrace the discomfort, that this is a totally normal part of human development. We have to build a sense of self so that we can eventually have the freedom or have the psychological safety to be able to let it go. And so what you're experiencing is a total normal response to this shift of paradigm for your brain. And so once we sit with the discomfort and even with the grief, we can then begin to ask new questions. What am I? It's like our old selves have to die so that we can get a sense of the nuance and complexity of what we really are. And now we can choose new narratives. I don't know what I am, but I'm excited to find out. I feel alone, but perhaps I can find my place as I learn how so much of what I am is because of everyone I've met and heard and the experience of my ancestors. I'm excited to see what that tapestry of me looks like. Or a new narrative like freedom can be scary and overwhelming, but I'm excited to see what could happen if I allow myself to grow and change, and I can watch myself in that process. And you can know that thousands, maybe millions of people over the centuries have recognized this illusion. Like I said, Eastern traditions have known and worked with the illusion of the self for thousands of years before neuroscience even caught up. You're in good company and you're not alone. So to wrap this up, losing the sense of self can be really disorienting at first. I can explain it now in ways that make sense to me, but when I was in it, I truly believed, I think I need to go to a mental hospital. Like, I think I've lost my mind. I don't know if I'm ever coming back. And I completely dissociated. But instead of seeing it as a loss, if someone could have just told me that what was happening to me so that I could contain it, then I could maybe have seen it at that time as shedding an old skin and making a way for something much more vibrant and much more connected, and fills me with so much more awe at whatever life is. And embracing the discomfort is part of this process. It's normal to feel a bit lost when your psychological anchors start to dissolve. But just imagine navigating life now more like a river. Instead of being stuck in this rigid shape, you can flow, you can adapt, you can wear your sense of self like clothing, useful, but not something that you have to be trapped by. And this balance is the key. And you can still appreciate your unique identity while remaining open to all the nuances and complexities of what you really are. And so as you explore this vastness shaped by everyone you've met and everything you've experienced and all this information coming in that you can't even attend to all at once, there's this sense of wonder about your place in the universe and your place in the world and your place in this story. And you're not alone in this journey. Many others have walked this path before you, and we can navigate this together and unravel this mystery of existence with curiosity and hopefully more compassion for ourselves and for one another. So I'm very grateful to have gone through that experience, even though at the time I really didn't think it was going anywhere except for full-on psychosis. Now I see it as a very necessary part of this exciting adventure. For more tools on the void, subscribe here at No Nonsense Spirituality and check out the website nononsensespirituality.com for courses, including a course on nihilism, coaching, books, and more resources.